we got started so late last week, everybody was ready to take off. I thought if you had any questions or comments or anything, we could begin there while we wait for the other class. Yeah.
Can you talk more specifically about justice?
Yeah. Yeah. This week we're going to talk about justice in the village. Any of you traveled to India? Been to India, Nepal, any place in South Asia? You were born in India? What part of India? In Bombay. One thing that I often tell people, this study is one vision of India. Now, India is huge, complex, 800 million people. Her experience is going to be totally different from this experience in the village. And I would go from this village in Rajasthan that was 4 hours south of New Delhi by car, and then 12 kilometers in by however to get into the village. And then I'd go back to New Delhi and I'd explain about the village situation to the family that I stayed with in New Delhi. And they have no experience with, no, it couldn't be like that. Oh, is it really like that? So the Bombay situation of India is very different, of course, from my village vision of India. So you can't kind of say, oh, that's what India looks like. I mean, India looks like, Bombay looks like New York City. And, high-rises and business and... Any other comments? Yeah. The village has 1,200. 1,200 people, yeah. I realized I did that a little quick last week. And I was just asking if anybody had any questions or comments while we waited.
Some of you weren't here last week when Erin started. This is Erin Moore. She's a lawyer, anthropologist.
Mother of three.
And she has done extensive research in rural India, looking kind of at the overlap between her field of law and field of anthropology, and looking at kind of the cultural construct of the issue of justice. And spent a long time living in this very remote country, trying to understand what's going on. So last week we talked about India in general, caste system in general, kind of explanation of the initial issues of arriving there, not speaking the language, not understanding the customs. And now she's going to go into more to these particular.
Okay. You people in the back, please come up and sit in chairs in the front. And if we could have the lights, because I'm going to begin talking not with the video.
And I'm sorry about the confusion about this. We've talked several times, I thought, about the idea that we were going to have these lectures occurring during the course of the studio. And the expectation is that you're here. It's not meant to be an hour to sit at your desk and work. This is meant to be a collective exposure to a broad variety of people who are doing really, in-depth and serious research in other fields. So it's supposed to be a part of the curriculum. So I'm sorry for the confusion. I'm interested in participating. Thanks. It was just a message to show
Okay, so for those of you who weren't here last week, I was going to say a brief catching up. I'm a cultural anthropologist. I'm an anthropologist who studies culture. 50% of anthropologists study culture. That's the culture of living people around the world in different environments. By culture, we mean not high culture of a degree of sophistication or education, but just how people live, how they think, their day-to-day belief systems, and I use the analogy of the lenses that we have on how we see the world. And we grow up and we begin, and I put on my child's first pair of sunglasses, and you begin seeing the world in one way, and then you get more lenses that you put on as you learn more things and as your vision gets broader, but you never completely take off your early lenses, but maybe you modify them a little bit. So culture is the study of how people see the world, basically. And one example that I forgot to give last week was I have a 7-year-old daughter, and when she was, I think about 4, I took her to UFC where I was teaching, and she called it my teaching class. And as we were walking in, you know, she noticed the sand volleyball court, and it's a sand lot with a net at the top. And we were walking along, and she looked, and she said, "Oh, is that where the kids play in the sandbox? Is that the kids' sandbox?" And I, you know, was kind of like, "Oh, well, not exactly." She didn't notice the net up high. You know, she's about this tall, and what she noticed, what she considered significant, was the big sandbox. And that's the kind of thing that happens all the time when we're seeing with our own eyes. I talked about that last week, that we pick up certain cues and ignore other cues. And when you go from one culture to the next, not necessarily traveling to India or to Watts, but just even within your own environment, there are subcultures. Each family has their own individual culture. You pick up some cues, you miss other cues. And last week I talked about the bathing after the funeral was really a ritual cleansing. And I thought, play in the water. Another thing my daughter said is, now where do the kids take their naps? You know, assuming that in this environment she had a daycare setting and that she was going to map her school setting with my school setting. I was a teacher and she knew what teachers and classes were like. And that's what we constantly do. And you have to kind of be open to new situations. And so anthropologists talk about going into the field and working in conjunction with a native anthropologist, someone from that culture. What does happen, though, is even your own culture has blinders. And so I worked with, most of the time I was on my own, but I also had a male Muslim English teacher from the local town, the local market town, who worked with me on 2 different 1-month projects. I also had a Hindu woman who came from New Delhi and was with me for a while. Now, she's not exactly the same culture as this multi-caste village, but she was an Indian, and she also had anthropological training. Now, she was uncomfortable with me asking real basic questions. She was more comfortable with a feeling of, hey, I'm from here, I know the answers to these things. So one time in particular, we were talking about wedding. We were going to attending a village wedding of a Muslim girl. And you might remember from last week, the girls are getting married before puberty. And one time she was saying, well, of course, now that they will go, and they will go into the mosque. And if the girl doesn't go to the mosque, she was explaining to me, then I was going to say the rabbi, the Maulwi, the Muslim priest, would come to her home and ask her if she would agree to the marriage contract. And in fact, in this village, no, they don't do that. They don't even ask the girl her consent. The father of the bride and the groom and his father and all the men go into the mosque and they agree to the contract. The girls and the mothers have nothing to do with the marriage contract. And so by her being from that culture, assuming things, you also have blinders. So it's, you know, ideal is to kind of somehow work with an insider-outsider team. Okay, so my individual issue when I went into the village was looking at ideas about justice. And you have to think of a legal system as being just one cultural system. You might be aware that, like, an anthropologist would study religion. Religions of, you know, the village. There's Hindu, Muslim, Sikhs, or how people get married, or, you know, whatever other cultural system. The laws are also just a cultural system. They reflect the values of the community. So my initial question was, what are the disputes? What do people dispute about? What do they do with them when they're disputing? Then later I refined that to saying, well, what is justice? What do they consider fair? What is moral? What is right? A harder issue. Anthropologists look at justice as being a community concept, that each community really defines their own issues of morality. So So then the question is, because communities don't live in isolation, whose justice is going to prevail? And I've, over the course of teaching, collected some articles from the newspaper that highlight, just the newspaper here, highlight these issues within our own culture. This was an article in the LA Times from February of 1993, and the title is, Ancient Traditions versus the Law. Traditions don't always travel to different cultures. And it's from Paris is the byline. The issue unfolding in a Paris criminal courtroom was not whether the two frightened African women cowering in the defendant's box, neither of whom knew enough French to follow the proceedings, were guilty, whether they were guilty of mutilating their daughters. Taki and Aurora, both 31-year-old immigrants from the West African state of Mali, admitted paying another woman $30 each to cut genital parts from their 3-year-old daughters in 1989. Okay, so the women were following their tradition, probably what they considered the moral right thing to do, which was female circumcision. When the girls reached a certain age, girls as well as boys should be circumcised. And that was kind of their clash. When these people then came to France, the court said, we've got to stop this custom. We consider it immoral and unjust. And so we want it to be, kind of the call to other immigrants who come, you can't do it here, and maybe this can go back to Africa. We consider this not appropriate. Now, they're not talking about male circumcision, just female circumcision. So, another case within our country that was in a Washington newspaper, praying didn't save the boy. As 11-year-old Ian vomited and urinated uncontrollably, then lapsed into a diabetic coma, his mother relied on her Christian Science faith to heal her dying son. 4 years later, a jury held the boy's mother and stepfather responsible for his death and awarded his biological father $5.2 million. The McCowans argued they acted reasonably in light of their Christian Science faith when they prayed instead of calling an ambulance. The Christian Science Church teaches that prayer and Bible reading can cure illness and that spiritual healing and medicine are incompatible. The Supreme Court this was in Minnesota, said that it was not manslaughter. They overruled the lower court on the manslaughter, but they did uphold paying the biological father. So when the Mormons say you can have more than one wife, and the Judeo-Christian law makers say, no, you can't, that's against the law, we consider it immoral. When one religious group say, we don't believe in this kind of medical treatment, whose values should survive? How do we respect religious beliefs? To what extent are religious beliefs incorporated into the legal system? And finally, this past week in Newsweek, there was an article about an Australian woman who was murdered and in Saudi Arabia. And the question was she murdered by her two Australian associates? And the two associates were locked in prison, and there was some question whether one of them would be beheaded publicly and whether the other one would get public lashes. And what would be appropriate. And of course we say, that's not how we punish criminals. We do it in private, it's not even televised, we don't do public lashes, we consider that inhumane. So in questions of justice, there's two kinds of issues. One is the substantive law, what's the issue at stake? And the second one is what's the process that's used for hearing the complaint, for punishing the person. Okay, so I'm going to move back to the village in India where I did my study. I just wanted to point out to you that these issues are constantly coming before our own Supreme Courts, as well as issues that are in other cultures. This is a village of 1,200 people, Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs. The dominant caste, meaning that the political leaders of the village, is a Muslim caste. that converted from Hinduism many centuries before, called the Mayos, and so they control village politics. For those of you who hadn't seen the village before, I was going to show about 6 minutes of a scene that I like that kind of captures, go ahead Heather, captures a feeling of life in the village. We talked a little bit last week about the monsoon, and this is a monsoonal rain in June. So this is the, oh, shoot. This is not the right tape. Stop! Heather, this is the right tape. If I have two of the same tape, then, no, that's okay. This is the tape to begin with, and then next. Sure. I don't have to talk over it. Where are the lights? So for all you architecture people, you can check out the roofing. Can't get the lights? What's happening in the background is there's great storms gathering, and you can see it coming, and so he's quickly roofing as fast as he can while the storm approaches. There should be sound. There should be sound. Later tapes that you'll see, this is called the men's bungalow, and we got that word bungalow from Hindi. You know, there's great borrowing of languages. Job tours, pajama is a word from Hindi that we got. This is a bungalow, three-sided open building. And these are the clouds coming. Well, you can't tell, but it's starting to rain. Imagine the rain coming harder and harder.
Did you make this?
Yeah. I'm standing in the bungalow now as the rain begins to pour. Well, it's probably the wires are supposed to be. And you know, it's one of those you wait for the monsoon. If you don't, a lot of the farming is dry land farming. If you don't get the monsoon, you don't get the crop, you don't eat. You don't buy clothes, you don't, So the rain has come. So it's very exciting. And this were years when there wasn't a good monsoon. And since all living is outside, when the rains come, you watch for it, and then you move everything inside. We were talking last week after class about how relatively painless toilet training is. And the little children are just kind of directed to poop over on one side, out a little bit. That's a little storage hut with the cow dung patties in it right there to the left. This is the mother of the family who you'll see a little bit later in some of the disputing. This girl who's been rolling around in the mud to the right, she was married this year, the year that I took this video. Pardon? Do they have... Oh, cisterns. No. No. Okay, that's the end of that scene. This I just took because you can see the house slowly, it's mud and dung construction, and it just slowly melts during the monsoon. And so it's just, those are the bricks that are just, they're bricks that are just heated in the, heated by leaving them out. They're not baked anyway. Okay, so that's the village, for those of you who hadn't seen it before. When I first went and I was going to talk about, Heather, you want to hit the lights, please? When I was going to look at disputes, people said, well, Erin, what if you get to this village and you live there for 6 months and there aren't any disputes that happen? And I thought, well, I don't know, that's what I'm going to study. This is the first time I was in the village. I had finished law school and then I went with my fellowship. And I thought, well, I'm going to go, whatever happens. And it's a little bit naive when you have any amount of people together to imagine that, you know, a day would go by without disputing. Of course, there's constant disputing. The traditional village council is the most popular place to take a dispute. It's called a panchayat. It is considered cheap. You don't pay anything. Convenient, it meets right in your own village. There are no rules of evidence and no judges. There's a feeling that no one person should be responsible for making a decision, that there should be a kind of a community consensus. The community being male elders, not untouchables, you know, kind of the wealthy male elders. There's an ideology that says where 5 men gather, God will join them and they will speak with honesty. The process is that people get together, they talk about what's going on. Generally, it's not a discussion of facts, but it's just a discussion about what should we do about the issue. And then because a majority of the villagers are Muslim, they'll break. There's a mandatory, or if you are going to follow the religious rules, not everybody does in the village, but if you are going to follow the religious rules to pray, I forget whether it's 4 or 5 times a day, I think it's 5 times a day, then there'll be breaks for prayer. People will go off either to the mosque or just lay out there a little rug or something and pray. Other people will get together in little groups and talk. They'll get back together, they'll break for dinner, they'll get back together, and so a hearing of a dispute could go on for 3 or 4 days, And then if they haven't gotten to any decision, they might just say, oh, forget it, we'll meet again in a month or two. So it's very familial. People are arranging marriages, people are sharing gossip. Most of the the council meetings happen when the harvest season is finished. And so they might put off issues and say, well, we'll get together when the main marriage season is also, during the very hot months before the monsoon, like April and May. So there's kind of a season for this. They tell folklore, they tell stories. Okay, so this is really, though, a forum that is controlled by the dominant men of the village, the powerful. And for the people on the political margins of the village, like, for instance, the water carrier. Last week when I showed the slides of the different caste groups, and there was the water carrier who was carrying a whole skin, like a goat skin, that he would fill with water to take around. He says, the panchayat does not give justice to the weak. They favor the strong. If you don't have money, you can't get justice anywhere. The mayos, this is this Muslim caste that are the dominant group, are like a jackal. When one howls, they all start to howl. They stick together. There are 5 fingers on a hand. This is a very common saying that they say. There are 5 fingers on a hand. They'll hold up their hand. Not all fingers are the same. Some are small and some are large. The small, the weak, will always be weak. A Hindu barber, remember the barber cutting hair last week on the slides? The Hindu barber said, for us, no one would give us justice. Everyone knows it's this, where there are 10 houses, there are 10 houses sitting there in the council, 10 representatives. Where there's one house, like his, well, you understand, it's this, where there are 10 families, they have 10 sticks. The justice goes there. So they think of the justice in reality is might makes right. And they have a saying where they say, he who owns the stick owns the buffalo. He who owns the stick owns the land. There's no decision for the poor, only for the stick. So then there's a story that they like to tell about, there was a wealthy Brahmin, and this is the Hindu priest teacher, the highest on the caste scale. And he was given a buffalo from a patron, a hardy female buffalo, black buffalo like you saw in the picture there that she was washing. And it gave good milk. And the Brahmin was walking along back to his village, kind of shooing the buffalo in front of him. And a thief came up with a stick and said, Brahmin, give me your buffalo. And the Brahmin says, well, why would I give you my buffalo? And he said, well, if you don't give me your buffalo, I will smash your head with my stick. And he said, I want to save you. I know the rules of our religion, and I want to save you from a great sin of killing a Brahmin. What you need to do is give me something in exchange. And the thief says, well, I don't have anything. I just have this walking stick. The Brahmin said, it's nothing. It doesn't mean anything, but you can give me that walking stick. And in exchange, it'll save you from a sin. You can take the buffalo. Okay, fine. So he hands in the stick. And the Brahmin takes the stick and he leads his buffalo on, and the thief says, what about my buffalo? What about the rules of Dharma? And we were exchanging. And he says, don't you know, he who owns the stick owns the buffalo. So that's the way they feel about justice. Whoever has the stick gets the decision. And then you ask, where does a woman get justice? And the women just laugh and say, they just get beaten and keep on working. Another woman said, if there's any dispute and you are angry, you're just angry within yourself and you keep on working. You don't go anywhere. So this is a village forum. In anthropology, we talk about legal pluralism, where this isn't the only place you could take a dispute. People, neighbors yell across walls, or head of a lineage will settle a dispute, or head of a caste could settle a dispute. You could take it to this council of elders, or there's also the state courts. Now, if you chose to go to the state courts, of course, you're choosing a forum outside the village, and the village, you still have to come home. And this isn't kind of society where these people can say, oh, my neighbors are ostracizing me or outcasting me, I think I'll move to another village. Generally, this is your home, your land, you will be there, generations will be there. And so you still have to come home. So going to the courts isn't necessarily a solution that you can use. There was a situation, most of the time the village elders will prohibit people from going to the courts. And right before I left the last time, there was a sweeper who was probably the lowest caste in our village, an untouchable caste. And he got into a fight with another untouchable caste. And they were fighting over a goat shed, and the sweeper broke his arm. And he was going into town to the government hospital to have his arm fixed. And he was stopped by some of the village elders, and they said, no, we're not going to let you go because the government hospital is supposed to report, the doctors there are supposed to report any criminal activity. And they would report it to the police, and the police would get involved. And so they pulled him back into the village. They had their own panchayat. They settled the issue against him. And then he had to go to a traditional healer to get his arm fixed. And so that the elders can keep issues within the village. Fines are said to go to the mosque or the school. Often they just go in the pockets of the village elders. And so it can be lucrative to be an elder on the panchayat. This is a kind of a voluntary, if you have power, then you can go and be part of the decisions. There are bribes. People give you bribes to take someone's side. There are fines to be divided afterwards. And oftentimes one of the fines that are given is that the person whose issue is being discussed has to take the elders and buy them tea and sweets at the local tea stall in the town. Okay, Heather, so I want to show you one short scene, and then, no, the other tape. And Heather, when the woman comes on with the shielding her face, then stop there. So this will give you a little bit of feeling of trying to study dispute settlement in the village. Men gathering, shouting, this case that you'll see a little bit of was a dispute with another village over the common lands. There was a question of who was supposed to, somebody was farming on the common grazing lands. Okay. And in the end, So they'll get their position together and then come back to the whole group again. This is the other side. Okay. I'm going to talk about this woman next. Anybody know how to do the lights? Oh, good. Oh, yeah, yeah. They knew that I was studying. Well, right. The question was, did I tell them why I was there? And there was an Indian anthropologist that had been there before me, 13 years before me, and brought me back the first day. He had written a book about life and custom of the Mayos, this dominant caste. So I was very fortunate in that they knew, first of all, kind of what an anthropologist was, that I was going to be there taking pictures, you know, listening to what they had to say, asking them questions. And that I might write a book afterwards. And so we got those first things finished. Now, when I first went, I didn't have a video camera. I just, you know, had my, you know, still camera, and I said to them, you know, I'm interested particularly, you need to kind of study the culture as a whole, everything that goes on, and then it all sheds light on maybe the disputing situation or something. And so the first one I said I was particularly interested in these panchayats, and it was very frustrating because the men would go off someplace and I'd find out later, oh, there had been a panchayat. It's nothing scheduled. It's that somebody has a dispute and people gather. And so it was very hard to kind of catch them, and I felt like I was fishing that, you know, I'd throw out the line and say, I'm interested in dispute settlement, and they'd say, oh, yes, ha, ha, ha. They knew I didn't, you know, understand a lot of what was going on, and they knew I was a woman and not married, and they kind of suspected maybe I was really there looking for a spouse. And it was over a long period of time that in the first 6 months, finally, you know, I did go along. I would say, well, I'm coming along anyway. And the family that I lived with, they assigned their son, who was about my age, to go with me wherever I went. And kind of, you know, he was in charge of me because the family was responsible for me to their other anthropologists who had, you know, given me. So they had this great obligation that nothing should happen to me. And so when I went to the first couple of panchayats, then the women would run and grab me and say, oh, come sit with us back and have tea up in the rooftops or up someplace else. And I'd say, no, no, no. And then I heard people say, oh, it's like Indira Gandhi. You know, there actually are a few women here and there who do something a little different. And I'd hear this, you know, like Indira Gandhi, and then they were very proud. They also knew that I never gave an opinion, never interfered. And so it was years later. The first time I went was 77, 78. And these are 86, 87 videos. This is really 87 that this video is from. After 77, 78, I went back in 86. And I tape recorded, but I didn't video. I tape recorded some of the things. And then I had people saying, hey, turn on your tape recorder, this is a good story. And I go, oh, are they telling special folklore within the panchayat so that I can get the stories, or, you know, to what extent do you interfere with the situation? And then the following year I came back for my dissertation, did bring a video camera. And the men by then of our village would explain to other villagers, she's doing a study, this is what she's doing, it's fine, and you know, it was okay. And I never interfered or never said anything, and it worked out. But you're right, you can't just come into a situation and suddenly say, hey, I've got my video camera. It was, you know, living there for 2 years, that then in the end, I did. And the next scene that I'm going to show you is actually in our bungalow where I just took the rain video from, and it's our family's dispute that I tape recorded and videoed. Yeah?
Just a question about excessive power. At what point did you, after experiencing something around you, come to claim that as your town, or our family, your family?
Well, in that I was doing my study there, and I was plopped in this family that was to take care of me, probably very soon. I just said, this is my family and this is my village. Some people criticize anthropologists for, kind of, it's almost a patronizing kind of thing, my village, or...
At a certain point, in the sense that something along there that is integrated you accept I don't mean for the question of patronizing.
No. I don't think I ever kind of went through finally feeling at home or mine. I think it's something that I really wanted to do, and this was my only opportunity. I had a very personal introduction to this place. As a foreign tourist, you really couldn't just walk into a village like that. Even, the police, I had to introduce myself to the police and get permission to be there, and there's always, even after a number of years, 10 years later, a question, was I really a government spy? And, I celebrate that people should keep their eyes open and continually question and be aware of who they're telling things to. And I'm not. They can still, keep suspecting. Because to be an anthropologist is a little bit odd, and I would be saying, well, I'm doing my work, and there I'd be writing and taking pictures, and there, hoeing and, doing very difficult manual labor, and it's like, they'd laugh and make fun of me, that's your work? Doesn't really seem like work to us. So I want to go back to, the next scene is a case that I've spent a long time working with, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about. You've seen the picture of the woman. And Heather, actually, could we have the lights? I'm going to outline it here on the board. It's your basic Hollywood script of boy meets girl, falls in love, boy marries girl's sister, has an affair with continuing both girls. Okay, so you have, I'll do that, boy who's married to another, and girl who's married to another. And this boy is in the family that I live with. And these two have an affair. And the problem is that his wife never has any children. And in the village situation, whether you're Hindu, Muslim, or Sikh, if you don't have any offspring coming, then it's considered justifiable to find another spouse. Whether you take someone else's spouse or whether you find a younger woman or whatever, and there's an assumption that it must be the girl's problem, and she will go back to her parents' village. So these two have an affair, and when I came to the village the first time in 1977 and 78, this one's sister, which a sister in anthropology stuff looks like this. They're connected, they're sisters. This one's sister was married to somebody else, and the girls were back in their home, as we talked about last week. When you're married, you're going back and forth to your parents' village. They were in their father's village, and so this one met this one, and they ran off, and this one didn't go back to her husband. And his whole village came to our village and said, we want our woman back. And our villagers, there's a point of honor, said, we're not going to give you your woman, even though our guy was wrong to have taken somebody else's wife, but we're not going to give back. The woman can't divorce. The power of divorce in village Muslim culture only comes with the men. So the goal of these two was to get this one to give the husband to give her a divorce. And he said, no, I want her back. She was pregnant. She subsequently gave birth to a girl. People also, villagers want to have a boy rather than a girl, because when you marry a girl, you have to give a dowry. You have to give money, jewelry, possessions. It costs a lot. So she had a girl baby, less valuable. In order to try and get pressure, this one and this one and this one and this one, they all went into hiding. And at some point, this guy, let's see, you probably all lost. The husband of the lover, 2, lover 1, I'll say my brother, boy. He ran into, his village man ran into the boy at one of the local market towns and kidnapped him and tied him up to one of the rope cots in their village and wouldn't let him go until this girl was released. Now, they refused to release the girl. Of course, our villagers said, we don't have her anyway. She was hiding out with her sister at their natal village. And eventually, he broke free and came home and went to the police and said to the police, I was kidnapped, and I'm going to file charges, kidnap charges against them. So once he was threatened with a lawsuit, then he agreed to give her a divorce. And that was the end of that. So this is stage number 1. And it's actually, if you can imagine, more complicated than that, but let me leave it at that for now. This went on for a few months there was even somebody else kidnapped before him. So then we all traveled to the head of the police for our district. It's like your county. And the police agreed to drop the kidnap charges, that this was our village council's decision, and it was all going to be within the village decided. And that the chief of police was explaining to me, because he knew I was doing a study, he explained to me that the local villages can settle any kind of dispute they want, because what they do is they get together as a group and say that they will just perjure in court, refuse to testify against each other in court so that they can maintain their own decision, so that it's a way to get self-rule. And then he turned to them and said, that's what you should do. Instead of me agreeing to drop the charges, you all should go back, have the hearing in court, and just perjure yourselves. And so the chief of police recommended to the men in the dispute that they should go to court, continue with the thing, and then just say it never happened. And so that's what they did. And that was the end of the first scene. Now, this was in 1978. By 1986, 1987, which is when I'm back, this one is never seen again. She goes back to her village. She was sterile. Boy and girl who's proven herself are living together, and they have, they're now, we can call them married. They have 4 children. And he's still a lover with this one, still lover number 1, who's the sister-in-law, the unfaithful sister-in-law in our family. He still carries on with her, and then who knows how many children she's had with her husband or with, him, her lover. And it comes to a situation, now this is the person that you see on the video, the original lover, and it comes to a question of 2 daughters, and everybody says they're really from him, but she's married to this guy, and so legally, it's up to the husband to arrange the marriage of the girls. And the woman is not allowed to say anything in the arrangement of the marriage. She wants a divorce. Of course, she can't get a divorce. She has to get her husband to grant the divorce. And so there's a panchayat called in our bungalow, and maybe we'll look at this scene. In the end of the scene, the panchayat decides that instead of our unfaithful sister-in-law here shouldn't live in that same bungalow area as the tape, and that she should move out to the fields further away from the village center. So she won't be so close to the temptation. You might recognize him from the other. This is her father to the right. Now, this is looking outside the bungalow. Her mother-in-law, the mother of the family that I lived with. So now she's sitting in the lower left, and her mother-in-law is right here. She's really mad. You've been doing this for 15 years, you never stop. She's been taking all the goods from her husband's household and bringing it to her lover's household. She doesn't leave even two pennies there. This is the husband. He doesn't say anything. He's filling the top of the hookah. They smoke homegrown tobacco mixed with brown sugar. He's filling it for the elders who are sitting smoking the hookah. But basically, this is a forum for older elders to speak for others, for the disputants. It's unusual for the lover girl to be there. It's unusual for her mother-in-law to come raging in, but her husband is dead now, so she comes in. Whether she dies of hunger, she should stay with her husband and live with him. This is the home of the wealthiest man in the village. He's the one that arranged the marriage. People blame him for doing such a poor job of arranging that marriage. But his wife is from the same village as the lover girl. Now, the men that came, her father and uncles, are all saying goodbye to the wealthy man and his family. So the decision was, no, she can't have a divorce. She's wrong. and she should stay with her husband, and she can't have any say in the arrangement of her daughter's marriages, and that she and her husband should move out of the village proper, where her sister-in-laws live, her husband's brothers, so that she's not so close to her lover's house. So these are her sister-in-laws. As soon as the men leave, they execute the decision. This is her in the dark blue with the silver buttons. Her sister-in-laws are to the left. They take her household possessions, put it on the cot, and walk her out to the fields. So that's husband and wife there. That's the family bed. Okay, this is the Heather, this is the cut. Oh, in a minute. So they're walking out. Okay. Hello? Heather? Stop it. That was the preview to the next scene. What basically happens is that night, her daughters say, you know, Mother, the sister-in-laws are going to beat you. And she does what she's always done, is says she's going out to the bathroom, and she ran away and has never been back in the village again since like 2 hours after I took that video. She fled, ran home, and lives in her father's village, and basically is divorced without the ability to remarry or have any kind of benefits, maintenance, or anything. She's just staying in her father's village, and I guess her sister and her lover come and visit her there. I'm going to talk more about her in a minute. I want to go on. She did file a case in the courts, and so I want to talk about the next forum, which is the courts. She filed a case in the courts, and the courts just said this should be settled within the village panchayat, in the village council. And so they had a council meeting there in the courtyard of the court, and basically agreed to the same thing that they had in the council meeting, that no, she wouldn't get a divorce, and no, she wouldn't get any maintenance, and that she would live peacefully with her husband in his village, and she just never returned, and that didn't happen. The courts were inherited from the British system, so it's as we got our tradition of courts, judges, and juries from the British, so did India, as we're both colonies. But the village is in a unique situation because there's no police patrol, there's no police outpost. And so it's really almost up to the villagers to call in the police and say, hey, we have something like the goat thief that I talked about last week, something that they want to report. There isn't any faith in the justice of the courts either, though. It's considered that it costs a lot of money. You have to, basically there's a feeling that you have to pay to have yourself heard. Hearings don't happen. You don't finally get your day in court and then you have a whole trial. but you have a witness, you walk into the local town, you have a witness, and then you might present another witness next month, and then another witness in 6 months. And so it could be years that you're kind of showing your case. So it's costly and time-consuming. People who live in the villages, village culture is totally separate from the towns. The town people look down on the villagers, say, you know, when the town lawyers saw me with the villagers, you know, they called me over, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm doing a study of village justice. And they laughed, you know, what are you going to learn from these ignorant villagers? And there's the villages in this area are Muslim dominated. The towns, the judges, the markets are all Hindu dominated. The police are feared. The police, are known for beating and bribing any side of a dispute, whether you're right or not. When the first time I was in the village, I was walking through the main market town, and I ran into the police inspector, the head of the police in the market town, and he had a man riding on the back of a buffalo, on the back of a donkey, which is a traditional punishment, face all covered in ash. They would stop in a crowd of onlookers. He would choose someone from the crowd to take off their shoe, which is considered polluting, dirty, not only with dirt, but kind of spiritually polluting, to beat him 5 times. And the crowd would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. More insulting than punitive as far as damage. They'd go to someplace else in the market. Somebody else would be chosen to take off a shoe and beat this person. When we got back, I followed them taking pictures. When we got back to the police station, the police superintendent said, this is not for your study. You know, this is my own special punishment, but now he will have a full and fair hearing. I was like, oh yes, I'm sure that's the case. When I interviewed the judges in '87 when I was there, a local judge says, he rolled his eyes and he looked up to heaven and he says, only he does justice. Another judge added, we only do paper justice. If 10 men say that an elephant can fly, I have to write in my report that the elephant can fly. I have to rule this way. Although the judge has the power to investigate claims or to call in separate witness, he said, the workload's too much. I can't be the investigator, the lawyer, so whatever comes to my court, I'm going to rule according to the witness. Okay, so I just have a real brief scene of courts, and the feeling that you should get is how different it is from a village scene of everybody sitting around talking, arranging marriages, gossiping. It's lawyers in Western clothes. It's the bureaucracy of files, and the scene that she just cut off, you can see them sewing the files. They don't have the manila folders in this area, but they're going through, and he's sewing the court files. And, the whole bureaucracy that the courts are anyway. So here they are. The papers are blowing. There's a little fan above. Now this is the outside of the courthouse. This is the tea stalls surrounding the courthouse where the petition writers, the lawyers, will meet here with their clients, and they'll hire somebody on this manual typewriter that types in the Devanagari script that Hindi is written in. And they will type the complaint for the papers that then will be filed in court. The turbaned men are Sikh in this photo. The opposite side is where we just saw. These are the lawyers sitting in chairs with Western dress. Their clients are kind of squatting in the windows of this little outside structure. This is inside the courtroom. This is the judge's table, and again, the fans, and the villagers will squat on the ground while they're waiting for their turn to be called, wait all day and have, 5 minutes. Okay, this is, Heather, this is the next scene that I'm going to show you in just a minute. This is a mosque. So where can you go if you can't go for hearing your disputes in the village council? If you can't go to the courts, there's not much better. Then there are healers that hear disputes. And the next, I was surprised, I went with a sister of the family that I live with to this mosque, and I was surprised that there was an old man saying, somebody had stolen my land, and I can't get it back. Can I have? And the Muslim priest, the Molwi, was writing out a prescription for him, and he said, take this that I've written. And he writes with yellow saffron on paper and tears it in strips like it's can be a pill. And he says, tie these in the trees, and God will do justice for you. And I said, well, why don't you call a panchayat? And he said, the panchayat isn't going to listen to me. The village council. I'm poor and I'm weak. They'll listen to the strong man. But what happened with the majority of people who come to the Molwi are really going for physical ills. And I noticed that quite a number, the majority, were women, were newly married, and described their complaints not in terms of, I like a divorce, I don't like this arranged marriage, but in terms of, I'm sick, I'm possessed, and so there's something called, when you somatize, when you take your stress and your tension, it happens to all of us, and you turn it into a headache or a neck ache, or you get sick. And so what happens is a lot of these young women are, they can't go to the courts or someplace and say, hey, let me out of this, I want a new life. So they get sick, and they go to this Muslim priest. He's also part of the patriarchy. He exorcises them, and I have a scene here that I will show you of him exorcising, rubs pepper in their eyes, takes one of these writings, and he burns it, puts the smoke up their nose. He swears at them, and he says, he talks to the spirit. And you'll see it in there. He says, what's your name? What's your name? And then the spirit says, I'm so-and-so, and I'm a sweeper caste. And then he swears at it, eat cow, eat pig. Now remember, these are things that if you're a Muslim or you're a Hindu, you'd never consider. And then he says, eat shit. And so he's insulting the spirit, and then eventually the spirit is to leave. And while the woman, you'll see her, is there shaking as she's possessed, her ears are plugged, her pinkies are plugged, and she's being held by the forelock. And these are all places where the spirit can escape. And so they're not allowing the spirit to escape except when the priest is ready to capture it, and he has a string that then she opens her eyes and he ties it, and then they burn the string, and that's the spirit has been appropriately captured. So most of the time, thanks Heather, most of the time he is teaching young boys the prayers of the Quran, and that's what he's doing here. They're memorizing passages from the sacred scripture. So as they recite their lines, they bow back and forth. Okay, now here he is on one side of the mosque where he's going to heal. He feels the pulse of the woman who comes to him, and the pulse indicates that she's possessed by somebody, by a spirit. So it's not to see, whether it's 60 over 40 or something, but the pulse indicates spirit possession. And one would notice from the costumes that even though he's a Muslim religious person, he deals with Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs. So he's writing his words from the Quran. He's going to tear them up. One thing he does is he says, put it in a hot bath with neem leaves, or put it in a pot of warm milk and drink the milk, this little piece of paper. Or women who are having trouble conceiving, or if they're conceiving only girls and not boys, he will have them eat eggs. Now for a village girl to have a pot of milk is great luxury, or to eat eggs is a great luxury, or a warm bath. Now this is a Hindu woman. He's praying over his head shawl and then, pushing the prayers towards her. He doesn't charge anything, although often men will offer him a donation. Can you put the sound up a little bit? Now's when he's addressing her. Who are you? Who are you? He's addressing the spirit. So she says Karuna is the first name of the spirit. Who's the second one? Who's the second one? Who's the third one? This is the woman she came with. So she's a male. You can see from the jewelry, the costume, the same Muslim caste that I live with. And this is where he's saying, eat pig, eat cow. Now I won't come back. I promise I won't come back. No, I won't come back. I promise I won't come back. No, I won't come back. I won't come back. Okay, so she opens her eyes just when he's going to tie that knot. Okay, that's the end of that scene. This is me, actually, with a globe. But we can cut it. We're talking about where is America and where is India on the globe. Which one is above and which one is below was the issue. Okay. So what we've talked about, and I'm almost finished, is we've looked at different places where you could take a dispute. And you have to frame your dispute in terms of the forum where you're going. Oftentimes, if you're going to a healer, you frame your dispute in terms of the body, rather than in terms of I have this conflict. But people did also frame their disputes in terms of the legal conflict. The other part is the substantive. That was the procedural justice, the substantive justice. And I wanted to go through what I said last week. We talked about in the village, the golden rule was not the ideal. It's not do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but treat someone according to their caste, according to their age, according to their sex, according to their station in life, according to their dharma, according to their haqq, which are kind of Hindu or Muslim definitions of how you should behave according to how your religion has spelled it out. And in the course, by tape recording and videotaping, like the council meeting, the panchayat with the lover girl and her husband, then I could go back and look at what they were seeing as the law, as what they considered the appropriate behavior. And I have a list of things they talked about. One is a mother and a father both should raise their children, but the father has the rights and the obligation to marry the children. So when the lover girl was, when the wife, who has had this long-term affair, would say, no, I don't want him to marry my daughter off to that village, and don't do that. They'd say, you don't have a right in that. That right belongs to the patriline, to make those political alliances. That you have no say in it, whether you like that arrangement or not. A good wife stays with her husband, serves him, and raises the children for wet or dry, they would say, meaning richer or poorer. And for them, wet or dry, meaning if you have a little house that's straw and the straw is coming down and you get wet, well, that's the luck of it. This was your marriage. A husband should be stronger than his wife, keep her under control. The bride's family is lower than the groom's family. This is a concept of hypergamy, and in the village, it means that when the girl is married and then goes to live eventually permanently with her husband's family in his village, they're not allowed to just drop in and visit any time. They should be invited. The husband's family can come anytime to the girl's family, but the political arrangement is that the girl's family, as they said in the midst of this dispute, is considered always wrong. They are the ones that should be kind of bowing, and they should be the ones giving gifts, and the husband's family gets priority. Divorce is the sole prerogative of the husband, and it harms the family honor, so it shouldn't be given. Now in the village, the Muslim man can have 4 wives contemporaneously at the same time. If he wants, if he's unhappy, he just takes his wife back to her father's village and just gets another woman. The wife can't ask for a divorce and can't marry again until she gets that divorce. Brothers have authority over and responsibility for the wife of a brother. And so when it came to who was going to pay for the marriage of, this girl, the mother was saying, I'm not going to give any of my jewelry for that wedding. And so the costs fell to the whole family, the brothers. It also happens that if one brother dies, oftentimes the other brothers will marry that wife to keep the land that brother had within the family. So if your brother dies, you're probably going to marry the wife who's living in your compound, whose children you're kind of helping raise anyway, and the land will stay within your family. They say an elder sister should not regularly visit a younger sister nor eat her food. An elder sister has higher status than a younger sister, and they threw this one in because the two sisters, the sister in our family, the lover girl, she was the older sister, and they said she has seniority, she should never go to her lover's house who was married to her sister. I think it's interesting it took me kind of a long time to swing around to her perspective. If you realize that the cards were completely stacked against her as far as the substantive justice standards. If this woman, Hormati, if she were a man, the cards would have been in her hands. She would not marry before puberty. She might have a say in who she would marry. She would not marry away from her parents and her natal village. She would inherit the family land, and from this position of economic and political strength, she would choose a second marriage alliance if she wanted. It would be within her prerogative to abandon an unwanted spouse, particularly one who didn't have any children, or to have four wives at the same time. So it's really, it's tough for the woman. Let me leave you with one thought. In the preamble to the U.S. Constitution, the Founding Fathers said, in the United States Constitution, "We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal." It was so obvious. All men are created equal. Of course, what they meant was men, not women, and what they meant was not slaves, and what they meant was land-holding males. And so it was self-evident if you understood what their culture was, what their parameters were. And so the next time you think something is so obvious, the correct answer is just obvious. Remember that we're all victims of our own culture, and that our culture gives us blinders. Thank you. Pardon? About 1,200. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Good. Oh, yeah. Often that's the case. And what has happened in one case is, while I was there was a murder. Not in our village, but in another village. And they had the council meeting. And then they called more villages and more elders on the case in court. And it was always understood if the councils, the traditional councils, could settle it, then they would perjure themselves in court and